Hello and welcome to We Turned Out Okay. This is the show where we are always working to help you feel seen, heard, and cared for, to feel happy inside no matter what your circumstances are and no matter what's going on in your life. Welcome. I'm Karen Locke-Culp. I am the host of this show and the creator of WeTurnedOutOkAY.com. And I am so over the moon because I get to have a conversation today with Katherine Reynolds Lewis, one of my heroes. She was in the Parenting in Place Masterclass, which is how I first got to know of her work. I have since read her amazing book. It's called The Good News About Bad Behavior. And this is what I'm going to say about Katherine. Katherine Reynolds Lewis is an award-winning journalist who writes for The Atlantic, Fortune, USA Today's Magazine Group, The Washington Post, and Working Mother magazine. Her story about school discipline was Mother Jones's most read article ever. She's a certified parent educator with the Parent Encouragement Program and lives in the Washington, D.C. area with her husband and their 3 children. Welcome. So, Katherine, I'm so glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Karen. It's great to be with you.
Very nice to meet you, and very nice to get to have your brain in our feed today, in our podcast feed.
Oh.
How are things? So we're recording in mid-November of 2020. It's been an interesting year, and I would say it's been a pretty rough year, but it's also been. I have noticed both personally and professionally some amazing things have come out of it. One of them was the Parenting in Place Masterclass, which I do hope we can talk a little bit about later. But what I'm curious about is, how are things for you, for your family? Have you noticed any of those amazing good things? What's going on in your life?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. It's been hard. I have to say it's been really hard. I think we've gone through like 2 or 3 or 4 different seasons of the pandemic, right? Where at the beginning we were hunkered down, we were all chipping in, we were trying to find the moments of joy, and then we like ran out of that. And I feel like every time, every 2 or 3 months, we need a reset, right? Where I realize, okay, I'm not doing well, or one of the kids isn't doing well, or my partner isn't doing well, and like, how do we adjust to this new reality of like, okay, 2 more months have gone by and we still can't leave our house to see people we love. So the last month has been really hard, I have to say. And I have been really struggling, but I've recognized it actually thanks in part to the amazing folks from the Parenting in Place Masterclass who, there's nothing like being a professional educator and then speaking to other people who are like, so what would you tell a client in this situation? And you're like, all right, it's not typical for me to cry every day, so you might want to get some help.
Yeah. So well put. Back at the beginning of the pandemic, I started having anxiety attacks. And I've, longtime listeners know I have a tendon disorder, which I got 9 years ago. And it has left me with the ability to walk only a few steps, which I then, went through an 18-month rehab to regain the ability to walk. And most recently, about 6.5 years ago, it left me without useful thumb tendons. And returning from that, I'm not at 100%, but I've had to kind of rebuild my life, and everything I do, on the computer, for example, is in audio. But I hadn't had any anxiety attacks since the thumb tendons went. So in other words, since I feel like that was 2014.
Yeah.
And when I was having telehealth visits with my therapist, and he would say, okay, 1 anxiety attack is too many. Like, we need to figure out how to stop this. Yeah. And I did pretty well until probably August, when there started to become signs that things were going downhill. And I just recently, and I wonder if this will resonate, Katherine, for you. I just recently was listening to a podcast. Shannon Connery, it's called Fix Yourself. She's a psychologist, and she had on Manuel, I can't remember his name. I'm so sorry. Anyway, a wonderful psychologist turned coach, and he was talking about burnout and what burnout looks like. Mm-hmm. And I'm listening to this. I'm doing my stretches this morning, and the first part of burnout is exhaustion. Mm-hmm. The second part of burnout is cynicism, developing a kind of cynicism. Mm. And the third part is not enjoying your work. And I was like, oh my God, like that is such a fabulous definition of burnout. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And a good measure of like, if you're feeling those things, you know, to really be able to acknowledge that and figure out what to do about it. Cause we don't have to live in burnout, just like we don't have to, one anxiety attack is too many.
Yeah.
You know, one day of burnout is too many days.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's a great definition. I think for me, it was sort of the reflected what was going on in my home with one child in particular who was not doing well. It's interesting because in some ways, maybe it was a burnout on the home front, because I love my work and I could do that all day. And you know, when you're pulled into like your children's needs,
Yes.
that tug, right? That's how I first started writing about parenting, was that work life balance, and that tug of war is really, I think, I was really struggling with. And then also just not being able to solve my kids' problems, right?
Yeah.
And not that I ever advocate solving your child's problems, but seeing that this, you know, a child who's stuck because of a pandemic, because of online school, and there's no in-person interaction, like, I can't really solve that. Right?
Yeah.
I don't have anything to help her with. I don't have any solutions for her, you know, trying on their own, you know, to solve it. So that was sort of the like feeling of, wow, I'm scared. You know, I don't see this getting better. And then it sort of spirals from there. So it's really just a very hard time. And I think that was one of the things the Parenting in Place Masterclass really brought home to me, is that I felt it was really powerful because all of the speakers, you know, we're all managing on our personal lives as well with this totally new world we find ourselves in. And so we were just all very much in it with the audience.
And I think it's really funny. I didn't end up, I'm registered for this round, and I'm all excited to register for the winter one as well. But I noticed in the spring one, I had no interest or very little interest in creating a password, going into the hub. Like I didn't want the bonus materials. What I wanted was to be there in person with speakers, with the people in the chat, to go through this with somebody,
yes,
you know?
Yes. It was like our own little therapy group support every Wednesday night.
And I'd be like, if they're saying that this is okay, like, it's okay. These are nationally recognized people. These are people at the top of my field. They're like my mentors and idols. And I loved what I really loved was you could all share about the things going on in your own life and how like we are going through this together. And I really actually, the book was written before the pandemic, of course, but I got the same sense going through the book, which is that, I mean, just the idea of a parent encouragement program,
mm-hmm.
and that you could be working in the parent encouragement program. You could be being a journalist. You could be doing these things that you love that feed your soul. You could be trying to involve your children and realizing that like things go wrong sometimes when you try to involve your kid. They're not always happy with that, and things don't go well. And that's okay. Like I think the knowledge that somebody like you could share about the things that are hard for you, as well as the things that are, you know, that I think that's even more valuable.
Oh, thank you, Karen. Yeah, at the Parent Encouragement Program, there's some wonderful mottos, but one of them is, we all need to have the courage to be imperfect.
Yeah.
And we talk about just living with courageous imperfection, because first of all, it's the reality. Life is messy. There is no perfection. And I've learned over, you know, the last few decades that perfection is not a good thing, right? Perfectionism is a form of anxiety, and it's impossible. Mm-hmm. And it puts an unrealistic, impossible expectations on us. And then we're modeling for our kids that they have to be perfect somehow.
Yeah.
So the more we just accept life is messy, the mistakes are part of the journey, right?
Yes.
That the messing up and the learning from it and the real life stumbles are the point, right? It's not a detour.
Yes. Don't you find that? I find when I'm working with someone, a lot of times people are like, no, just give me the tip. Just give me the idea, and I'm just going to take it, and that's going to fix it all. And it's like, but it won't. And I've come to embrace the marathon as like the fun kind of. I mean, I think it's a real mindset shift where, you know, nothing is the way that we are structured as humans is not to, okay, I'm going to tick this box and then it's all going to be fine. Oh, now there's a new box to tick. I'm going to tick that and it's going to be fine. And instead it's like when I was able to kind of embrace the like, the uncertainty, to get comfortable with the risk, and to be able to say, like, we're on an adventure and we're going to be fine. And we don't know how it's going to turn out. I recently read a Tolkien quote, which was, something like, it simply isn't an adventure if there aren't any dragons. And I was like, I love that so
Right.
much. Like, we're on an adventure. And the idea of perfectionism as a form of anxiety, I think that's a really important concept to kind of highlight as well. Let me ask you, what is happening with the parent encouragement program now in the pandemic?
Oh, PEP has gone online of like everything. So PEP is a wonderful 30 plus year old nonprofit started by Linda Jessup, who is, I always say, when I talk to someone who created a movement or created an institution, it's like drinking straight from the fountain of truth, right? And she's just this uncompromising champion for children and for parents getting out of their kids' way. And so they are teaching online and working directly with institutions that are looking for classes. So they're very much, there's a curriculum and there's a whole cadre of wonderful leaders there. I have, since journalism turned sort of upside down and my speaking on the road ended in March, I really haven't been able to be involved with PEP the way that I was in the past, but my husband still is very much. He's a champion of the dads in the group and he gives lots of talks for them. So it's a wonderful organization. I definitely encourage people to, if you're looking for curriculum on parent education, Pet Parent is just a great resource.
I will link to the organization in the show notes. I'm going to try and link to, like, anytime a link comes up, I'm going to try and write it down and keep track of it. And those will all be in the show notes for anybody listening. So speaking of your husband, just before we got on, before I hit record, you had mentioned that you live in a multiracial blended family. And I would love to hear a little bit about what that is like for you, what your
Yeah, I
experience of that is.
appreciate the question. So I am half Chinese and half white. My mom is Chinese from Singapore. My dad is white from Connecticut and Wisconsin. And I grew up in a very white community, and I went to a school that was majority white, and I've worked in institutions that are majority white, like all people of color have. And this summer, with the death of George Floyd and the protests and the mass awakening, so many of us have been dealing with race our entire lives, but as especially led by the voices of Black people and Black women in particular, I just realized that I have my own internalized white supremacy, that, I have really in some ways suppressed my own Chinese heritage or identity, while thinking of, well, I appreciate it, and I don't want to make it complicated for people. It's my Chinese name is really hard to say, so I've just had a very white passing in existence in many ways. I mean, I think looking at me, people know that I have some, ethnic heritage, but Katherine Reynolds Lewis, pretty white name. So I've had my own sort of growth this year of trying to be more upfront. And I think at previous points in my career, I felt like I didn't count as a person of color. I didn't want to, somehow glom onto Asian communities if I didn't really, I didn't really experience some of the marginalization that, especially during the pandemic, many of my 100% Asian friends have experienced. I thought, well, do I really count? And I've just decided that that yes, my own identity may be complicated, but I want to share more of it with the world, and people may misinterpret or feel like I'm on a bandwagon. I don't even know, like, people will always misinterpret, but I just wanted it to be out there. So I'm half Chinese, half white. My kids are a quarter Chinese, 3/4 white. We are, so we're a multiracial family. None of us is really the same race. And that was very much my experience growing up as well, is that neither of my parents were the same race as each other or myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I think weren't always aware or sensitive to what that meant. At the time, it was all about assimilation. It was about fitting in, about, suppressing the part of you that makes yourself different. And I'm just so grateful and hopeful that we're entering an era when we can talk about the problems more openly and not feel, you have to assimilate to survive
Yeah.
or to thrive. And when I met Brian, he had a 7-year-old daughter who is our number one child because she was my first experience of parenting, and she's now 27 and just an amazing human who lives 3 miles away. And we get to see her, every Friday night for dinner. We do Shabbat dinner together, and often many walks or chats or whatever, visits in between that too. So I feel really blessed that she moved to the DC area 2 years ago after spending some time in Boston right out of college. And I just feel really blessed, to have had a life that took a different path than I thought, right? I never anticipated becoming a mom, to someone who's 19 years younger than I am. But it's great. I mean, it's really been a privilege.
Oh, that's so cool. I love that you talk about like acknowledging that there's always going to be somebody who misinterprets things. So as a person of privilege, I'm a white person. My name is Karen, for goodness sakes. And so that's
I'm so sorry.
Well, what's really interesting about that is, so pre-pandemic in February, my husband and I went, we live just outside of Boston. Well, not just like 45 minutes-ish, half an hour outside, depending on traffic. It feels closer now because there's a lot less traffic.
Right.
But my husband and I went to a comedy show in a very wealthy suburb, Sudbury, which is, closer to Boston. It's like, I think it's 99.9% white people, very wealthy. And there was a very courageous and very funny Black comedian who got up, and one of the things that he talked about was all you Karens in your LL Bean. And I was like, I'm wearing LL Bean. My name's Karen. Like, what he's talking about? Like, what's he saying? And it, as the ball got rolling in the pandemic, like I'm as a person with the name Karen, I probably saw this a lot more, but like every article was like the Karens are doing this and, whatever, first Karen in the White House and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, and I went to listen to a podcast called Minority Corner, which is on the Maximum Fun Network. It's the host is James Arthur M. He is just an awesome guy. And what they do is they talk about history from the perspective of Black and brown people. And the first one I happened to I was like, well, what's at the top of the feed? You know what I mean? And so this is maybe April or May. And at the top of the feed was one about how they're all Karens or something like that. I was like, what the crud? So and that was seriously I say that in that voice because talk about a person of privilege, right? I don't even know why somebody's making fun of my name, but it's hurting me. And so I wrote to James and I said, I'm just so curious about why this is. I try really hard and I'm doing a lot of listening and I want to be an ally and what is going on here? And he wrote me the sweetest letter back. And he basically said, comedians need a hook. Comedians need to be able to hang a label on a name or on a one-word thing so that it's funny. And he advised me in the sweetest way possible. He said, if you can, let it roll off your back. He cited several friends of his, relatives of his with this name. And just think of it as kind of hashtag not all Karens. And I realized how, first of all, I just love that. And second of all, I realized how it's not on, I no longer have to be like, hey, what the crud? You know what I mean? I could feel like I was on the side of the good.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting story. And I think, you say you're a person of privilege, but I think I certainly have a lot of privileges, right? I have educational privilege. I have a proximity to whiteness. I have economic privilege. I'm an American citizen, right? I speak English as my first language. So we all have different aspects of privilege and marginalization. So I think for me, this notion of I have privilege, it comes with responsibility, right? It's and I wish that people would take that perspective instead of saying you're privileged and saying, wait, no, look at all these ways I'm not privileged, instead of being defensive, right? To say, yes, and
Yeah.
I understand that comes with responsibility. I understand that means that I need to do more in the world to, try to seek equity, and that none of us gets the stamp of approval, ally for life, a certified anti-racist, right? Because I'm half Chinese, I can never do anything wrong, right? No, like we all
Yeah.
get up every morning, just like with parenting, get up every morning with the best intentions, and we do what the best we can. And sometimes we mess up, and if we can learn from it, that is the most important thing. So,
Yeah.
so I've certainly made lots of blunders, especially this year, trying to be more intentional and aware of being anti-racist. And, it is what it is. Just like we were talking before about people, I changed my name on Facebook. And I think it's so interesting you brought up your name, because names are so personal to us.
They are.
Our names say so much about ourselves. And I have always been reluctant to use my Chinese name, which is Xue, which is XY, or the initials, right? It's not, obviously not easy for an American audience. And I also felt a little rebellion. My parents didn't give it to me on my birth certificate. It was sort of this hidden, underground name. So I felt like, well, I'll just use the name y'all gave me. But this year, just in talking with friends, especially Black, Indigenous, people of color, they encouraged me to just try it on. So I changed my name on Facebook, and I know that someone who's an acquaintance on Facebook, made a couple snide comments about like, well, some of us have been out here, existing as very obvious people of color, and, others are just getting on the bandwagon. It's like, I don't feel any need to challenge that, because I know what I'm trying to do, and it helps me to have feedback, to know how that sometimes comes across. So I'm more aware. And that's just like my aspiration. It's not like it never stings, right, to be misinterpreted. It's hard to be misinterpreted and have people, use that shortcut, right, of the Karen name, or how you appear, or what they judge about you by the labels you wear, right? But we all are just seeking better understanding and learning and growing. It's it's all the process.
And I have to say, it's so good to hear that story, because it gives me courage to go out and try things or change things, and to say, oh, you know what, if somebody said that to Catherine, I know that's not true of Catherine. Like, right. I know that you are a good person who is doing your best, and you couldn't have started a day earlier than you started, because you weren't in that headspace yet.
Right.
And that makes me feel so much better. And so one of the things that I did actually after George Floyd was murdered, and during the sort of initial period where I was like, holy crap, I have to help. I have to be a helper, in Fred Rogers' terms. Was I created a page on my website. It is WeTurnedOutOkay.com/bias, and I will link to it in the show notes. I put together a whole bunch of resources about, like, so one of the first things I wanted to know was, what could I do, as a person who's trying to help parents translate things for their children, and help them understand. I mean, Fred Rogers is like who you go to, right? And recently, I feel like it was in 2019, I watched a documentary of him called Won't You Be My Neighbor? I read the book and then watched the documentary. And it's so interesting, because you think of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood as like this sweet place. So I almost, in my head, even I watched it, but I'd almost translated it to a sort of Barney-like, we're all happy and it's all so good. That's not how it was at all.
Right.
Like, he takes hard, serious, scary things and translates them for children to feel safe, and also encouraged to ask questions, and supported and loved. And actually, one of my coaching clients gave me this mug, so I don't know if you can see it, but it is a picture of Mr. Rogers and Officer Clemens with their feet in the pool, because and so this is one of the things I put on my bias page /bias. There is video of Officer Francois Clemens. Well, Francois Clemens, the gentleman who plays Officer Clemens, sharing about what it was like for him when Mr. Rogers asked him to be the cop on Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. He said, in my neighborhood, he's a Black gay man. He says, in my neighborhood, cops were not people that you could go to. They were not safe people.
Wow.
And so it was a big leap for him to play an officer. And then the story of them sort of fighting racism by being together with their feet in the same pool, because apparently Mr. Rogers was a minister, and washing people's feet is like a big deal in
Right.
his religion. And at the time in the 60s, there were ministers refusing to wash Black people's feet. And so Mr. Rogers basically said, okay, how can we give children a supportive idea of like how to be anti-racist? And maybe that wasn't the language that they used at the time, but that's what they did. And I get goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah.
You know, so good. I wonder, Katherine, have you written anything? Is there any place we can send people where you might have written or have shared resources about like your journey, or anything having to do with your feelings on anti-racism, how to dismantle
Oh,
racism?
but that's a nice question. It's interesting because the same friend who encouraged me to change my name also said, you're going to be writing about this someday. But I really haven't. I haven't
Okay.
really processed it. I've written a lot. I mean, I've written for decades about race, identity, disability, gender, equity. So I have a whole body of work on my website under the article section. Actually,
Okay.
won a prize from the Society of American Business Editors and Writers for my columns on gender, racial, and LGBTQ equity for Fortune.
Oh,
So I
wow.
have like that whole
Congratulations.
body of work, including one of my favorite, which is, oh no, I think this was an Atlantic piece, is how to make your company less racist and sexist. I wrote for the Atlantic that, and I'm doing right now a fellowship through MIT, the Knight Science Journalism Fellowship, that's focused on racial bias in schools and pre-K to 12 education. So that will end with several articles, long-form narrative about
Very
that
cool.
topic, the sort of science of racial bias, but
Do you
not
do you
out
have
yet.
a sorry, do you have an email, like a newsletter list that people can
Mhm.
join if they want to get notified about these things? Because I'm going to jump on it this afternoon.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. It's the same place,
Okay,
katherinerlewis.com. Yeah.
KatherineRLewis.com. Cool. Um, I'm just going to make sure to make a note of that. Um, and this goes a little bit off topic, because I think I definitely want to talk about the book. I definitely want to talk about like how parents can be helpful right now, how they can feel supported. But I'm curious about, particularly when you were starting out as a journalist, um, how that was for you. Like, how did you do it? Did you encounter any dragons? What was that like?
Oh, well, I actually, it's funny, I majored in physics in college.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, it wasn't until my senior year that I realized I did not want to be a physicist. So I had been on my high school paper. I've always loved writing and reading. So I thought, oh, I'll just, give it a try, and moved to New York City, lived with a friend from camp in a converted 1-bedroom walk up, with a divider in the middle of the living room for my bedroom, and worked in a bakery serving coffee and donuts, and just job hunted. So
Wow.
I really just started out seeing if I would like it. And I found I got a job with a daily newspaper called The Bond Buyer, covering state and local government finance. And I just loved the immediacy of journalism. You talk to someone, you write it down, and the next day it's in the paper. It's
Mm-hmm.
just so satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love daily journalism. I moved here to DC with The Bond Buyer, and then I worked for Bloomberg News. And then, I got sort of my dream job as a national correspondent for a Newhouse News Service, covering work, family, personal finance. And that was a great gig because it was really sort of whatever I wanted, right? Whatever I wanted to write about. It was all feature and enterprise stories. So
Wow.
at Bloomberg and in daily journalism in general, you spend so much time chasing the pack, where you're like, you get beat by someone else, or you get scooped by so-and-so, and you have to try to catch up. And it was just really gratifying to be able to write original stories where I was adding value. I wasn't just sort of beating the Associated Press by 10 minutes,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's sort of the career path. And then in 2008, in May of 2008, maybe it was earlier, my bureau chief started walking around the newsroom saying, everyone really needs a backup plan. And I'm
Oh
like,
boy.
huh, maybe I should get a backup plan. And at the time I had really little kids, so I was not really interested in going back into an intense Washington, D.C. newsroom in that sort of daily journalism grind.
Mm-hmm.
So I started freelancing on the side, and I started the Working Moms website for what was called about.com at the time, which
Oh my God,
is now
yeah.
like the Spruce or something.
Yeah.
And that was just great. I had sort of 1 day a week of like trying to do side gigs. And then sure enough, in August, they announced they were closing the bureau and laying us all off. So maybe
Wow.
I don't know, that was my dragon, the Great Recession, lost my job. And I decided I'm just going to give it a year, see if I can make it as a freelance journalist. So, which is what I did. And I sort of every November 9th, our last day was November 9th. And I always say every November 9th, I renew my contract with myself.
So I love that.
Just hit 12 years.
Yeah, that just happened.
Yep.
Do you, oh my God, there's so many things I want to ask. What does that look like for you to rewrite your contract or to renew your contract?
Oh, that's a great question. So I also am obsessed with sort of productivity, efficiency, work life. I mean, I covered workplace for over 15 years. So I'm really interested in what feeds people's passion at work. And I try to always be, first of all, making enough money, right? I don't want to lose money by working for myself when I could be working in a newsroom or working for an employer.
Mm-hmm.
So I always have, monetary goals. And then I have the sort of feed your soul goals, like what do I hope to achieve this year? And I sometimes talk about my 3 Ps rule, that anything I do is going to either pay really well. It's gonna feed my passion, right? Something that I really just have this personal fulfillment around, or it's something that is going to be sort of for my portfolio. So it's pay, personal fulfillment, or passion, and portfolio. And ideally everything I do meets all 3, but it's got to at least fit 1, right? You don't want to take badly paying work that is boring and doesn't advance your career. So I sort of think about that. I always look back and assess, and I look at, how much time did I spend on these projects? How much was my hourly rate? What do I want to do going forward? And it's interesting because I often do reevaluate and realize, oh, these things that I was chasing aren't meeting that 3 Ps rule. And actually this thing is much more valuable. So what I realized this fall was really that speaking with people, that creating video content through the Parenting in Place Masterclass series, doing Facebook Lives, that was just so fulfilling, and it's really easy. It feels easier to me than a lot of the writing. The writing is so hard. Right? The research and the reporting is great, but the writing is painful. So that helped me just say, okay, I'm gonna go for it, right? And Debbie Reber and I are just charging forward with the amazing collaboration of all of the authors, in the squad, the Parenting in Place Masterclass series. We call ourselves the squad, or the collective. I guess it's on the website. It's called the collective. That especially right now in the pandemic, it's so isolating. Right, being in my beautiful but still small home office, writing by myself is just not feeding me the way that collaborating and connecting with viewers and readers is for the time being anyway. So yeah, it really always helps to have that deadline to check in with myself, so you're not just sort of blindly going ahead doing the same things you've always done.
So I didn't create a deadline with myself, but I think what I'm going to do is set a particular date for next year as my sort of Independence Day, my contract day. So I in October, back in August, I started to, the tendon disorder that I live with and have lived with for 9 years causes scar tissue in my tendons. And I've had it really well under control. I haven't needed PT for more than a year now. And in August, I started to need PT. I've got scar tissue in my hamstring. So not a lot of walking in my life now. And I think it was really a sign of the times. August, September, October for everyone, I'm sure for you, the kids are back to school. You can't just throw a tomato on the table and call it dinner anymore. You have to cook and stuff. And There's just, and this has been a very pressure filled, when we were corresponding about getting you on the show, you referred to this period as filled with cognitive dissonance. And I was like, that is so true. That's a perfect word. So I should have seen some signs that I didn't see. And in October, I went into the hospital with diverticulitis.
Yeah.
And I was lying in the hospital envisioning myself like basically taking all of the glass balls in my life, my children, my husband, our home life, the people in my community. And it was as if I threw them all up in the air and stood under them with a fan to just try and keep them all up in the air. And I forgot to take care of myself. And I'm lying in the hospital and I'm like, something needs to change. What needs to change? And I realized that I need to take care of my own needs first. And part of that is income. Part of it is the feelings of self-worth. Like I have to take care of myself first, whatever that means. Even if it means you get up from the computer after 15 minutes and you walk around.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It means asking for help sometimes. And I am so excited because over these 3 weeks or so, I have created a plan that has me feeling so fulfilled. Like it's got the 3 Ps.
That's great.
And it's just like, I had to have that happen before I was really here, again. And I'm wishing for you listening that you don't have to go into the hospital to do that. That instead you can have a more Katherine style of like declaring the date. Here is the date. Today is the day, and a year into the future. Here are my intentions.
Well, I'm glad you're better. And it calls to mind like Ariana Huffington's story about, just reaching total exhaustion. And that's how she started writing about sleep and launched Thrive Global. And, it so often you have to have that just end of your rope before you change it. So, in some ways I think that, it's really true. We think about, some people say self-care and they're like, oh, that's just so fluffy. I don't need bubble baths. But, self-care is something different for everyone. So that's definitely been part of my, when I realized I was tapped out about a month ago, I'm like, okay, I need to really not get to that point of, of not having anything left to give.
Yeah. Yeah. So, thinking about a listener who has kids in Zoom school, who has some of the people that I work with in my coaching community, some of the people I've heard from who listen to the show, for example, have quit their jobs because their child needs to have somebody sitting right next to them. Kids are getting in trouble for things like looking like they're not paying attention. There's lots of stresses like that. I won't go into them all. But then there's also, so my husband was laid off in January, and he's done some incredible things since then, and I'm super, super proud of him. It's also a little tense going forward into the new year without, for 23 years, we had solid insurance, corporate employment, and now we're excited, but it's also a little scary. Many folks are in that position. So worried about everything, and not taking that time for themselves. And I'm wondering, Katherine Reynolds Lewis, if you have any thoughts on what step could that person take?
Yeah, well, it's interesting you use the metaphor of drop the ball of glass balls, because one of our speakers is Tiffany Dufu, who talks about dropping the ball and how important that is, especially for women, to just stop doing things. And the other person who's in the series, who's a longtime friend of mine, is Laura Vanderkam, who famously tells the story of interviewing someone whose basement water heater had just died, and the basement was flooded, and they had to spend an extra 10 hours or something in that week dealing with the water heater. So similarly to you going into the hospital, right? We don't want it to have to take a broken water heater or a medical emergency, right? So instead of getting to that point, I think it's thinking about, what can I drop? What do I absolutely have to do today? And what can I just not do? And what are the big priorities? Like if my water heater broke right now, what would I stop doing? because I had to deal with this emergency. And then
Mm.
don't do those things. Right? You know, there's
like future-proof it.
right, exactly. So, you know, I think when you talk about kids in Zoom school, absolutely advocating for your child with their school is one of those things that only you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's so important for parents to be on their kids' side right now. It is really hard to learn on Zoom school. And when we let that, you know, seeing our kids, we have a much more up close and personal view of our child's failings and imperfections and all the things that they aren't doing at school. And if we are on the side of the teacher coming down on them saying, you know, this and this and this are bad, then the only person in that interaction on the kid's side is the kid, right? We need to be the resource to support them emotionally, right? We're not going to be kind of cracking down hard on them, and accept that this year is just not a learning year. It's not an academic year, I should say. There's a lot of things our kids are
learning. A lot of learning.
Right. There's a lot of learning, but it's not about content, right?
Yeah.
It's not about that math lesson or the vocabulary, or are they going to be quote unquote behind when, you know, whenever we all get back to whatever normal is in the future.
Yeah.
It's really about what is your child learning about themselves, their capabilities, their challenge areas. You as a resource, are you someone they can trust? Are you someone that will stand up for them when the school has unrealistic expectations?
Yeah.
And you know, that's just so important.
Yeah.
So you know, for listeners, another thing I always tell people is thinking, you know, your comment about future proofing, thinking about in 25 years, what will matter to me? Right? That I, you know, baked the cupcakes for the outdoor, you know, get together, physically distance or whatever, or that I perfectly cleaned my kitchen every night, or that I was there to catch my child when they were spiraling into depression.
Oh my
gosh,
gosh.
I noticed, right?
It's so good. That's going to be, I think we're going to call that the title. In 25 years, what will matter to me? That is so crucial. Katherine, I would love to read just a quick couple sentences from the book, The Good News About Bad Behavior. It's so funny because I had wanted to talk about the cover as well. It's like one of my favorite covers ever. It is a smashed plate of spaghetti that looks horrible and a mess, and just I think sums up so perfectly the subject matter of the book.
It's as if I wrote it for this year. You know?
There was so much that I was just like, it's so, you can see all my little post-it notes if you're watching the video. So you write on page 2, you write, I'm going to read what you wrote on page 226. You write, if you take only one insight from this book, I hope it's this one. Childish misbehavior isn't an emergency situation or a sign of something gone wrong, but simply a natural part of growing up. And I would love, we probably got 5 or 10 minutes left. And I would love to kind of go out on this idea, right? Because so many parents who don't have experience in child development, who haven't been a part of the parent encouragement program, feel like, oh, something's wrong because my kid is misbehaving. And can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's just such a very common reaction when we see our kid acting out or doing something that they shouldn't. You know, we catastrophize to 20 years from now when they drop out of school, they're a drug addict, they're living in a van down by the river, right? So we need to catch ourselves in that moment and recognize that this is how children learn, is by messing up, by doing the wrong thing, by experiencing the consequences of life that life brings to them. And whenever we can get out of the way, we actually facilitate that learning. When we intervene and we punish or we criticize, then all of a sudden, instead of the child having to look at their own actions and say, well, that was pretty dumb, that got me into a bad situation, they're thinking about their mean mom or their critical parent, or how they're going to get back at us. And the next time they're going to do it even worse, right? And then instead of them learning from life, they're in a power struggle with us, and they're focused on us. So we really want to always not get in the way of them learning, and be sensitive that sometimes if we see the same pattern over and over, that's your child giving you a signal of, I don't have the skills I need
Yeah.
in this moment. And we
Yeah.
need to be the detective. We need to be curious, and obviously not in the moment of a heated argument, but after the fact, say, inquire and figure out, like, what was going on when you were sitting in Zoom school with the camera off and your head in your hands. Like, that's not like you. So I'm really asking, and I know maybe in the past I've come down hard on you, and I'm not like that. I'm not trying to do that right now. I just really want to know, as someone who loves you and wants to support you, what's going on? What is happening in that moment for you? And help kids find that sense of purpose in their life again, which I think they're so often missing. And it's really not going to come in school. There's a very small minority of kids who are thriving in Zoom school, but I have an introvert, an extrovert, and an ambivert. And all three of them do better seeing humans in person and interacting in person. We're all social animals. So accepting that this is nobody's at their best, and don't make it about your expectations or, they disappointed you, but instead be on their side. That's sort of the big takeaway. It's like, we need to be on our kids' side, and we need to be helping them in this quest that all of us is on, to figure out, with my unique brain chemistry and my personality and attributes, how do I be the best version of myself, right? What tools and strategies and coping skills are in my toolkit that I pull out when I'm feeling stressed or sad or scared or worried, because they're going to be different for everyone. We can't just tell our kids what to do, but we can be their mentor. We can be their coach. We can be side by side with them, helping them to discover, how do I function best? What is my optimal learning, environment or, method? And it requires a lot of trial and error, right? As all of us have discovered too, a lot of the things that we relied on for coping do not work anymore in 2020. So we're all having to explore, and that can be a joint thing, with your family.
What's really interesting? You say that, and it immediately makes me think too. A lot of people are realizing that what they thought was important isn't important. It's not, we know lots of people, I do not have permission to talk about anything, in my own family regarding this, but we know lots of people whose college students are saying, I am taking a leave. This is not worth it to me. I want to learn, but I don't want to learn in this way. So I'm going to find some other way to learn. So kids they're taking guitar lessons instead of taking music theory classes, right? They're doing things. And I think certainly for me, as I'd already kind of come a long way on this journey of like trying to be supportive for my kids, and trying to help them do what they care about. Like, it's not so much about what I tell them to do, but it's about what do they care about. And I think that's become even more important. And we've seen the benefits of that because they trust us to have their best interests in mind. So they will say to us, I'm having some tendon pain in my arms and I don't want to stop playing video games, but I think I might need to see the doctor, right? Like they're able to know that we're not going to, micromanage their lives in such a way that, well, if you're having trouble, we'll just take your computer away or something like that. Like things parents do that seem so logical, and I have done them myself. Like, I'm not trying to be condemnatory at all. It's just that they don't work. And what really works, to your point, is just helping them know that you are on their side, that you support them, that you're going to choose them.
Right. And of course, I don't want to say that there are no limits. I actually have one of my child's phones because our screen agreement was violated, and that child lost the phone. But it's an agreement, right? It's something that we decided together that address their needs and our concerns. And that is how kids learn. It's not me saying, okay, I've decided I've had enough. It's a screen agreement. What wasn't followed, so no phone for a day.
Right? That's so important. I'm really glad you brought it up. In fact, in the book, you talk a lot about the different kinds of parenting styles, and that you can't just be an only loving parent, because that's passive. You can't just be an only sort of dictatorial parent, because that's all authoritarian, right? You need something in the middle that incorporates both love and limits.
Right.
Love and some firmness. And Gosh, I feel like I want to have you back on the show so we can dive more into cool stuff like
I
that.
know, this is a great conversation. We went in a lot of directions I didn't anticipate.
Me
So.
too. One of my favorite things is kind of throwing out the script, actually. I'm really, really glad we've been able to do that with you today. Katherine Reynolds Lewis, thank you so much for being with us. It's been such a pleasure to talk with you today.
My pleasure, Karen. Thank you so much for having me.
And you can find Katherine at katherinerlewis.com. That's Lewis, Lewis. I think, yes, that is it.
And the
That's where you'll
Parenting in
find the
Place
news.
Masterclass.
Parenting in Place Masterclass. Thank you
Yes.
very much. Parentinginplacemasterclass.com. And finally, I always have a special thank you to our producer, the man who not only makes good audio, but like has helped me encounter the bad behavior and shape it to what we wanted. And he's very encouraging and wonderful. He is the 23-time winner of the Husband of the Year Award, Benjamin Culp. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time. All right. Just have to stop this from recording. There we go.